Sorry if everybody couldn't hear me before. I'll just do a brief introduction. Again, I'm Charles from the Cornell Lab. I run the bird cramps program. And we're going to be working today with two biologists from the California Condor Recovery Project, Estelle Sandhouse and Joseph Brandt. So I wanted to give them a chance to introduce themselves as well as to tell you a little bit about what it is they do, and then we'll get into the meat of the hour. Why don't you start, Estelle?
Hi, everyone. Well, my name's Estelle Sandhouse, and I'm the Director of Conservation and Research here at the Santa Barbara Zoo. And we're one of a number of partner organizations working on behalf of recovery of the California condor. And here at the zoo, we have an exhibit with ambassador birds, and we also have members of the field crew that works managing and reintroducing condors in Southern California. I think Joseph can talk a little bit more about that aspect of the project.
Great. Why don't you go ahead, Joseph, and let us hear a little bit about what you do as part of the project.
Yeah, thanks, Charles. So I'm Joseph Brandt, as Charles has said. So I am the supervisory biologist for the California Condor Recovery Program at the Hopper Mountain National Wildlife Refuge. So that's a lot, so I'm a Fish and Wildlife Service biologist who is responsible for managing one of the release sites where condors are released, and we have a flock in the wild that's managed. So we work closely with Estelle and Santa Barbara Zoo, as well as many other partners. But essentially, we have a flock of condors in the wild in Southern California, so in Ventura County, Santa Barbara County, Los Angeles County, and Kern County for the most of it. And we've got about 75 condors in the wild there. They're nesting and kind of doing what wild condors do. And so we have a team of biologists that track them and manage them and basically deal with any of the threats that they face while out in the wild. And then we also reintroduce, we augment the population by releasing condors into the wild periodically to kind of continue that population growth alongside the wild nests, which of course people are watching now.
That's great. Thank you guys for sharing that information about yourselves. So most people, or many people, I would say, probably don't quite realize just how big an effort this has been in sort of the historical aspects. For many of our viewers, and even me to a certain degree, this is sort of the best views of condors I've ever had, and maybe lots of people don't know much about them. So I wondered, Estelle, if you might be able to comment on kind of a historical context for where condors were and how we got to where we are today, with as much detail as you feel like would be useful to know.
Absolutely. Well, I think a lot of people are aware that the condor population had been in decline since European settlement of the United States. And really in the 1980s, the decline became very drastic. So at one point, there were only 22 birds remaining in the world. And so for those viewers who are really familiar with biology, when you get to those numbers, it's doubtful as to whether you might even be able to recover the species in a best case scenario. And, there were a number of human-related factors that were responsible for the decline. But the main factor that emerged was basically lead poisoning from spent lead ammunition. And so there were a lot of things going on during that time. And, I think I'll maybe let Joseph speak to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service aspect of the recovery. But it was really a controversial time. People didn't necessarily agree on what actions to take when the population got that low. And so eventually the condors, the remaining condors were brought into captivity. At the time, the Los Angeles and San Diego zoos, actually the Wild Animal Park in San Diego. And captive breeding was begun to rapidly bolster the population and preserve genetic diversity. And then from there, captive breeding was very successful and reintroduction was able to begin in the 90s. And so really they were truly rescued from the brink of extinction. through these last measures. And there were so many partners and scientists, public support that really made that happen to this day.
That's great. And Joseph, looking at it from the Fish and Wildlife side of things, is there anything you think would be useful to add to give people a sense of just what it's taken to get the birds to this point?
Yeah, I think that Estelle characterized it pretty well, but I think, maybe the important things to realize is, at that time, we really weren't studying, the folks who were out keeping track of the birds and studying the populations were studying a population that was in decline for a number of different reasons, but it was very difficult to really ascertain, what was going on because of how few condors were out in the wild. And certainly it was controversial to bring all of those wild birds into captivity. They thought there was some essence to the bird that was going to be lost when making them all captive. And we really had no idea whether condors were going to be able to reproduce in captivity. So the last remaining condor was brought in from the wild in 1987, and it wasn't until 1988 that the first captive pair produced a chick. So it was a very, very kind of controversial, but also stressful time. They were kind of pulling out all the stakes for the effort to try to save the species. Condors were one of the first endangered species. It was listed as endangered in 1967. So it had been a while. There were many efforts taking place in the wild before they brought them all into captivity, but it was really kind of seen as the last ditch effort.
Yeah, it's really an amazing story, and I can remember being a kid really when a lot of that was going on. And just to let you guys know, I don't know if you can see the live feed right now. I'm lucky I sort of am sitting in a little control room, but the adult just stood up, and the little one is just looking great, looking gigantic. And it's really a great segue into sort of fast forwarding from that period of sort of the real start of the recovery project to here we are maybe 20 to 30 years later. What's happening now? And maybe a good place to start with that is, all the birds were brought into captivity. Maybe, Estelle, you could comment on what's happening now on the captive side and why, and then we can sort of segue into what's happening in the wild and why, and sort of how those meet in the middle. So Estelle, would you mind starting?
Sure. So, I think it's important to think about the captive and wild populations and management really in the context of the whole program. So they're not really separate. So the captive population does primarily exist as a genetic reservoir and also as a supplement, as Joseph said, to the wild population. And so captive breeding is still going on, and birds are still being produced and released into the wild. And how many birds produced is partially determined, or maybe largely determined actually, by the needs in the wild. And so that really is guiding the captive activities. And there's some interesting things going on. Very early on in the program, like Joseph said, we didn't even know if condors would breed well in captivity, and we also had to get those population numbers up really fast. And so initially, there was a lot more basically human rearing of condor chicks early in the beginning when they were just starting out, and now they were doing that also so that they could pull more eggs and do what's called double or triple clutching of condors. So if you remove an egg from a female, especially early in the season, she will often lay another egg later on. So they only lay and care for one offspring at a time. And so there's a little bit less double and triple clutching, depending on the needs. And there's a little bit more parent rearing of the chicks actually in the captive facilities. And then we also have ambassador birds at different facilities. So here at the Santa Barbara Zoo, at the Oregon Zoo, at the San Diego Zoo and Wild Animal Park. Boise's, the Peregrine Fund's World Center for Birds of Prey in Boise, Mexico City Zoo. Those are all places where you all can go and actually see ambassador birds and learn about birds really up close. So there's kind of this interplay between captive breeding, the field, and then of course the ambassador birds on that side.
Great. That's a great description of what's happening. And also, I really like that you brought up the fact that there's no real end or hard edge between these different aspects of the efforts, like petals of a flower or something, where they're all contributing to this central whole. I don't know, Joseph, if you want to comment on sort of specific things that the Fish and Wildlife Service might be doing in the field that are aimed at helping conserve and recover condors.
Yeah, I think certainly there's a strong connection between what's happening in captivity and what's happening in the field. And so the Fish and Wildlife Service, on top of coordinating, all of these partners and whatnot, across the program, we also manage a release site. It's actually one of 5 release sites that are in the wild where condors are being, released and flocks are being established. So those other release sites, there's actually 2 in Central California, one being managed by the Ventana Wildlife Society near Big Sur, and one at the Pinnacles National Park, which is about 30 miles to the east of Big Sur. Then another one in Arizona that's managed by the Peregrine Fund, and that flock is in kind of goes from about the south rim of the Grand Canyon up to the north rim, or up to Zion National Park. The San Pedro Martir in Baja, Mexico, it has a release site being managed by the San Diego Zoo Global and the Mexican government. And then we at the Hopper Mountain National Wildlife Refuge Complex have a release site. So much of what we do at the Hopper Mountain release site is happening in these other locations. So the first step was kind of to establish a population. And so that was taking birds from captivity and releasing them into the wild. And so we did that, and that started in 1992 here at Hopper. We were the first release site, and we started releasing birds into the wild. It takes a bit of time for condors to mature. Those birds were about a year to a year and a half of age. Condors don't mature and aren't going to reproduce until they're about 6 or 7 years old. So there was a fair amount of time where we were just dealing with young juvenile condors, and young juvenile condors are a lot like young children in that they can get themselves into trouble. So we had a bit of the Lord of the Flies syndrome going on, where we're dealing with a lot of behavioral issues and, basically trying to help the condors behave the way that we expected condors to behave, while in terms of observing them in the wild. We got over that hump, and in 2001, they started breeding. And that kind of started our kind of nest monitoring program. Many biologists before my time, spent lots of time tracking birds in the wild and checking on nests, and identified issues with some of the nesting process. I'm sure we'll talk about it a bit later, but with microtrash. And then in the larger kind of, in that larger kind of flock, we were trying to basically monitor and detect causes of mortality. Because we had such a small population, remnant population, we really didn't understand what was driving, the population decline. And so the way to do that was to establish a wild flock, and then to track that flock and determine what was causing them, what was killing them, or what was causing, them to have low reproductive success. And so what we identified was that lead poisoning was the major was the major cause of mortality. So much of the management that we do is kind of really revolves around managing lead mortality in the wild, in the flock. So the source of lead is from ammunition, and it's from game or other animals, wildlife that has been shot with lead and left in the field, whether it be their gut piles or offal piles or the entire carcass. Condors are, of course, are scavengers, and they feed on that. That's actually a significant food source to them. So they become contaminated through ingesting that contaminated food source, and it's contaminated via ammunition. So if an animal is shot and the lead fragments and contaminates the meat, and then condors ingest it and they get sick and can die from it. So we trap condors to monitor blood lead levels, and we treat condors when they have when they have elevated blood lead levels or are showing signs of lead toxicosis. And that's a real major part of the program. It's happening everywhere at all of the release sites. And then, there's variation between how much nest management goes into play. But in Southern California, we manage nests very closely. We monitor them with the help of the Santa Barbara Zoo. And then also we'll enter the nest periodically to examine and check up on the chicks. And we really developed the Nest camera system as a way to better monitor nests and make for a less of a reason. We now with Nest cameras we actually enter and physically handle those chicks less often because we have such an incredible tool with the Nest camera to monitor the chick's development. We just saw feeding take place on the camera. Being able to be sure that the chick is, doing exactly what it should be doing, seeing the chick grow just in the last week. It's probably almost doubled in size in just a week. All of that is allowing us to be much more hands off, in terms of going in and examining the chick.
Well, that's actually a great, segue to two different aspects. One is this is the second year that we've actually had these birds on camera, these individual adults on camera, and it's a different site. And as those of you who have followed the cam, those of you out there, I just looked and it looks like there's almost 700 people watching right now. So hello to everybody. Those of you who watched starting last year, you know that the chick last year died before sort of successfully fledging away from the nesting area. And we got the word, I feel like it was maybe 2 months ago-ish, that there was a necropsy done and that the cause of death was lead toxicosis. And this is a bird, that young bird had been checked out not that long before. And I think Santa Barbara Zoo biologists accompany the U.S. Fish and Wildlife biologists during those checkups. And I wondered if you guys could just spend a couple minutes, either Estelle, I wasn't sure how exactly involved Santa Barbara was in that visit, or the post visit workups. But if either of you could speak to, just briefly what you think happened with the young bird from last year.
Yeah, I think, Joseph, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, sure, Estelle. So last year, we did actually right as we went live with the camera. We had just gone in when the chick was about 4 months of age to tag the chick, and then whenever we handle the chick or any condor, we take a blood sample and we can test that blood sample for a lead exposure. And what we found was the chicks appeared to be very healthy. Its blood lead level was low, so it did have a detectable amount of lead, which is unfortunately a common thing for condors, but it was well below the level requiring treatment. So with that, we left we allowed the chick to remain in the nest. We didn't take any additional action. We did place a transmitter on the chick, so we were able to track so when the chick fledged at about 6 months of age, we'd be able to track that bird's movements. And so about right around the time of fledge, so 5.5, 6 months, so about a month to 2 months later, the chick left the nest. It on the camera appeared to kind of, not the most graceful exit of the nest cavity, but this cavity was situated such that it didn't have a really steep cliff, from the entrance to the nest. It was a little bit lower angle, and it's pretty common to see chicks leave the nest before they're flighted and kind of scramble around that area. So we didn't see that as any big red flag. And then we started monitoring the chick using telemetry. And shortly after the chick left kind of left the nest, we picked up a mortality signal. So the transmitter that we placed on it its signal will change as when it doesn't move for a period greater than 12 hours. So we went out and we responded to that mortality signal. We went out, located the chick, and it had died. And it was either heavily scavenged upon or potentially predated. We weren't sure, But in recovering that chick's carcass, so quickly, we were able to send it into a forensics lab. So we all of our necropsies are done at the Ashland Wildlife Forensics Lab. It's a Fish and Wildlife Service lab, and they do a number of different analysis, including tissue analysis for lead poisoning, and found that the chick did indeed have very elevated very elevated tissue levels for lead. And so, from there we can kind of start to put together maybe what happened. Either the chick was very compromised because of being lead poisoned and was predated, or it had died from lead poisoning directly and then was scavenged upon. And so, it's not 100% certain either way, but, one of those scenarios is what, caused it. And obviously lead poisoning was a major factor in that chick's demise, unfortunately.
Well, and I feel like this is a great opportunity to sort of jump into, since a lot of people are watching, we've been talking about lead now for quite a bit, and I'm sure people are psyched to get to, we got a number of questions about lead in particular from viewers. And so since we're dealing with the topic right now, I thought let's just jump into a few of those questions if that's okay. And honestly, I'm not sure, again, whether Estelle, lead is something that you guys manage at the zoo. So if it is, I encourage you to jump in here. Excuse me. First off, one viewer wrote in, I've read that to try to prevent lead poisoning in these birds, carcasses of animals that are safe for them to eat are sometimes provided. Is this true with these pairs, or the pairs maybe in the hopper complex? Do you guys provision them with carcasses?
Yeah. So Estelle, do you want me to take it?
Yeah, go for it. Okay. Definitely.
So yes, I guess the quick answer is yes. There is supplemental food being provided. The primary reasons for providing that supplemental food is actually not to provide a clean food source for condors. There's kind of reasons I can get into with my explanation, but the primary reasons why we place food out is one, in order to trap condors. So we place food which allows us to trap condors and monitor their blood lead levels. And so that's done associated at trap sites. Basically, we have a large box. We place food inside of it. Condors go into that box. We drop the door, and now we have condors in which we're able to handle and test and put transmitters on and that sort of thing. It's
basically an extension of that old sort of shoebox trick with the carrot.
It really, I mean, it's
the bunnies.
Yeah. And so the second reason why we place food, or we place out food, is actually a part of our release process. So, we release 5 to 10 birds every year to help augment and grow the population. And so those young birds don't have the parental care that the chicks would have that fledged from the wild nests. And so condor chicks, after they leave that wild nest, get about a year's worth of parental care and are still fed by their parents after they leave the nest. And so these young birds that we're releasing don't receive that same parental care. So as a substitute for that, we place food out at basically the refuge where we release those birds.
Gotcha.
Of course, we can't stop the rest of the wild flock from coming in and feeding on those carcasses as well. But over time, the wild flock has grown in size and really has expanded their foraging range to include lots of areas outside of what's being provided of them. And so, I would say in Southern California, the majority of the food that's consumed by the wild flock is actually food that we're not providing for them.
Gotcha.
Those young chicks are eating food, but are eating the majority of the food that they are eating is the food that we're supplementing. But for the rest of the flock, much of the foraging that they do occurs, off of refuges and away from where they supplement, where we're supplementing. So if we were trying to really feed, a clean food source to that entire flock, it would entail putting feeding sites or, these vulture restaurants or, across, what is about a 13,000 square mile range, which is essentially what the condor flock inhabited just last year, and that
Wow.
being able to do that is not really feasible. I don't think we just have the management capacity to do that.
So the second part of the lead question that we got a few different flavors of involves the legality of lead ammunition and the alternatives. So maybe if you could quickly just sort of speak to the complicated aspect of the legality of lead ammunition in California, and just maybe mention what alternatives, where people can learn more about alternatives, that kind of thing.
Yeah, great. So in California, we had legislation passed. There's actually been 2 laws passed in California. One was the Ridley Tree Condor Protection Act, and that passed in 2008, which restricted the use of lead for the purposes of big game hunting and some depredation within the range of the condor, which certainly likely reduced the amount of lead that was being used within the range of the condor. But we continue to see exposures. Some of that has to do with that hunting, big game hunting is not the only source of lead. Really shooting, anytime a wildlife is shot, and wildlife can be shot or disposed of in the wild for many different reasons, whether it be depredation, ranching practices, hunting. Then there's also the illegal, there's poaching and whatnot. So it eliminated lead for some of those practices, or the use of lead for some of those practices, but not all. And then in 2000, actually it was just last year, in 2015 or 2014, legislators passed the AB's Assembly Bill 711. And so this is going to restrict the use of lead ammunition across all of California for the take of all wildlife. And so they're phasing that in over a 5-year period. And so we're very hopeful to see, a continued decrease in exposure and really, continuing. This is being paired with an education and outreach program to basically allow. That's part of the reason why it was also phased in over a 5-year period, to allow for folks to transition from using what they know works as lead ammunition to alternatives. And so there are many different alternatives for ammunition. It really, you can get into the weeds with this, but obviously there are many different types of ammunition. So if you're using a shotgun, you're talking about anything from slugs to birdshot to buckshot, depending on what you're hunting, and even the birdshot has lots of different sizes. And then you're looking at for rifle, you have center fire, which is typically what you're hunting big game with, or rim fire, which is what you're doing a lot of your ranching practices, or just shooting, say, coyotes or ground squirrels or those sorts of things. So there's a lot of nuances and lots of different, so many alternatives are available, in terms of ammunition. Of course, the waterfowl, the restriction of waterfowl of lead for waterfowl hunting. Really, shotgun ammunition is well ahead in terms of birdshot. There's many different alternatives for birdshot. But the place to go to get all of this information is a website that's managed by one of our partners, the Institute for Wildlife Studies, and it's called huntingwithnonlead.org. And they're a wealth of information. They're really managing the outreach that's happening across all of California, and helping the hunting and ranching community make that transition as painlessly as possible.
That's great. So huntingwithnonlead.org. So if we sort of step away from the lead, excuse me, which is been roundly seen as one of the reasons why these birds populations, the condors, are not increasing at the speed that really they probably could or should. I think a lot of people just have, because it's such a weird kind of bird, it's a bird that just people do not have experience watching at their backyard bird feeders or even as they're driving around. There's a lot of questions, as you can imagine, about what are they doing? How does this work? And one of the ones we've gotten probably more than any other, and I wonder if maybe Estelle, you could speak to this, if your bird's at the zoo exhibiting this behavior or otherwise, but you see them do this really fun interaction with soil and rocks and the substrate of their nest cave. And everybody's like, what are they doing? Are they eating it? Are they pulling it to protect the chick? Are they bored? And really, all those seem like great hypotheses to me. Good job, everybody out there. They seem like great things to test. And I wonder, in your role, if you've had the opportunity to learn much about that interesting behavior.
It's such a good question that is still, I think, kind of ripe for testing in some contexts. So part of it, I think, depends on which birds you're seeing doing it. So condors, first of all, they're super curious, and they explore their environments in a lot of ways. So, you might see our young adult female condors, who are not breeding birds, doing that sort of exploratory behavior that we generally call mandibulation, so mandible jaw. You can see them doing that all over their exhibit, whether with soil, rocks. We affectionately call it gardening. They pull up plants and just manipulate it in their mouths. Not unlike a dog would with its mouth, especially a puppy, exploring different objects. And then when you're dealing with breeding animals, there are a couple of specific behaviors. So in the nest, as you guys have seen, they're doing this manipulation of the substrate and even kind of sifting it around. And there's one particular behavior that was documented probably even prior to the 80s, maybe in the Koford era, called rim building, where they kind of build these little dirt rims around the egg, and they're just kind of constantly manicuring the substrate in the nest, because remember, they don't bring in twigs or sticks. As you can see, there's this sandy bottom generally, or if it's in a tree cavity, it looks a little different. And then there's this other aspect of the sort of behavior where condors are observed to sift through substrate and actually select pieces of bone or potentially shell, so really calcium-containing items, and actually ingest them. And there are a number of different hypotheses as to why they do that, but especially who's building eggs, and a male and female who are feeding a chick who's rapidly growing. Bone growth requires calcium. We think that's probably a big reason that they're doing that, and calcium-containing things. And also contain calories, and they're able to digest it. And then maybe it also can help with digestion. So yes, sis, I know we have a first grade. Yeah, there's still a lot to be learned about some of these behaviors with condors. So we have a lot of observational evidence at this point, but we haven't done trials where we're actually setting up experiments. And with a species like the condor, where you have so few animals, it's difficult to sort of do that sort of manipulation with their environment when you're still at this point. When you have a lot of animals, you can pull out a subset and then start kind of messing with their nests a little bit, and not a harmful way, but just to kind of test these hypotheses. And we're just not there yet, I would say.
Gotcha. And just so you know, you're breaking up just a little bit, so I don't know, maybe I could hear most of your answer, but it might be that on the live stream, okay, I'm not sure that everybody got it, and I'm not sure there's anything you can do about it. I just wanted to let you know, just in case.
Okay. Thanks.
You look a little bit more pixelated to me right now, but still smiling. So I'm going to ask you one more. So do they have any particular anatomical adaptations that allow them to sort of like eat anything like this? Do they have a crawl like chickens? One viewer wanted to know, and I'm assuming they're talking about maybe sort of a muscular fore stomach that kind of helps grind things up, or is there anything peculiar to their anatomy that makes them such flexible foragers?
Well, they do have a crop, CROP, which I think that's also the term for chickens. You could use either term for chickens, where they're actually able to hold about 2 to 4 pounds of food at any one time. And so you have to think, they're scavengers, as Joseph mentioned, and so their food is really far apart in time and space. One foraging trip could be 225 kilometers just in a day, and so it's sort of feast or famine. They're going to find this carcass and get a lot of food, store it, and digest it over time, and then of course with parents they can come back and share that with their nestlings, which we've seen this morning.
And to keep a nestling growing, how much food are they needing to find? And sort of there's two parts to that question to me. How much just volume do they need to be feeding the chick? And you might be able to give a particular, it's really hard to tell what they're feeding because they're regurgitating it, right? They don't typically physically bring back, something to the nest. But so there's how much do they have to provide? And then I don't know if either of you could speak to how big of a range do they sort of frequent to get that food, kind of give context to how hard it might be to get the food that they're eating.
So Joseph, I think I'm going to throw this to you because I know you had done some kind of loose calculations.
Sure. The energy requirements for the chick ends up being an energy requirement for the adult. So as the chick is growing and developing, they need about the same amount of food as an additional adult bird would require. So each parent is feeding more or less feeding for 1.5 adults. And so, some of the early biologists kind of looked at food requirements in captivity and found that in order to maintain body weight, condors, require about 10% of their body weight a day. So condors weigh roughly 18 to 20 pounds. If you do that really quick math, it's about 2 pounds of food a day. So the chick, obviously at this age is not requiring, it's not getting 2 pounds of food a day, but as it grows over time, its food needs are going to rapidly increase, and you guys are all going to get to see hopefully get to see some really juicy, great feeding sessions, which are super fun to watch and a little bit gross too, but it gets, we enjoy it anyways. So that's about the food requirements, for the birds.
Awesome.
And then so as far as how far they go, so condors, I can just speak to the birds that are in our flock. So these birds foraging, so their nest is just north of Fillmore, California, and they will fly. Actually, the male actually has a GPS unit on him, so we can actually track his movements, and we'll probably share some of those maps as we move forward. But we can track his movements, and they will often fly, anywhere from, the closest proffered feeding site is 45 miles away. And then much of the areas where they, the birds will forage on their own, where there's lots of non-proffered game that we're, identifying, is also about 45 to 50 miles away. We have had birds, make flights from that Fillmore area up into the southern Sierras on foraging trips who are actually nesting at the time. There's been a pair in Big Sur where one of the females in Big Sur, California, actually flew all the way to to Ventura, California, to the sites near that we manage here in Southern California. And that was about a 200-mile trip, and to be able to make that flight and still make it back to the nest within that 2-day window, which is kind of, as the chick gets older, about the rate of food, that they get fed. So yeah, they fly very far. I don't know how difficult it is for them because of how efficiently condors fly and move across the range. It really is remarkable to see. They're a soaring bird. They very rarely flap their wings, and they just use those air currents as a way to conserve energy, but also to just really get around. It's really impressive to see.
That's awesome. And sort of, the camera gives a very kind of biased or hard to contextualized view of what these birds are. And obviously you guys have been in the presence of these birds, but if you were to talk about the size of the chick, let's say, pick an object in your head that would be the size of that chick right now, and how much would it weigh right now? You guys have an object in your mind, either of you?
I can go.
Yeah.
So I have a couple of props that kind of help with this. So this is a model egg. This is a dummy egg. This actually might have been
small compared to your hands.
Yeah. So this, and so that's where they're starting. They're starting. The chick weighs, right around maybe a half a pound. They're not very large. And so it's about the size of a goose egg, but people can kind of get the scale. I'm a big guy, but here's their a dummy egg, and so now the chick is probably it's probably anywhere from So I know because of when we go in to check on the chicks. So at 30 days, the chick goes from a half a pound and weighs about 4 pounds on average at 30 days old. And so by 30 days old, it's about the size of a chicken. And then 60 days old, it's maybe the size of a turkey. And 90 days old, it's about the size of a bigger turkey. I don't know. So at this point, the chick is about maybe a little over a week old. I would say it probably weighs anywhere from a pound to a pound and a half. So it is growing very rapidly. So at 6 months of age, it's going to be a full-grown condor. It's going to have a wingspan that's 9.5 to 10 feet. And again, another prop. Just to give size of scale, so this is one of the primary feathers of a condor. And
you hold it up just a little bit there because of the Google Chat things up there. Yeah, can't even fit it in the view.
So yeah, that's the size of a condor's feather. And so I'm 6'4". I'm a big guy, but to kind of give that to scale, like that's my forearm. I mean, it easily is the size of my fingertips all the way to my elbow and then some. So they're very, very big birds.
So, we have these giant birds. How big is this cave that they're in? Because again, it's a weird thing. I think most viewers now have realized at some point that there are two different entrances to it. And I'm not sure that you've been to this particular nest site, Joseph, but can you give some perspective to kind of like how big that might be? Is it like a kiddie pool?
Yeah. Yeah, I think kiddie pool in terms of surface, the general area of the nest is the nest is kind of triangular shaped. So there is one entrance that's off to the camera view, the left of the camera, and then there's another entrance that the bird will walk in from behind the camera off to the right, and so you can see the majority of the cavity. When we installed the camera, we did our best to capture as much as we possibly could. So you're seeing pretty much everything except for the porch and just what's outside the cavity. And so it could fit 2 people inside of it comfortably. Not standing, but on their hands and knees crawling in and then sitting, say, sitting, with their legs crossed. So if I were to kind of give some rough estimates of size, the depth of the cavity from, the entrance off to the left to where, say, the chick and the parents usually hang out near that kind of far back corner is about, maybe 6 to 7 feet. And it's about the same, going from that same corner back to the entrance where that's off to the right of the camera. So if you made a triangle roughly that size, that'd be roughly the size of the cavity. And then the height, I don't know how, maybe 3.5 feet, 3.5 feet tall in terms of the height of the cavity. I could sit at least in certain spots in the cavity. With my legs crossed and sit upright and not I might be knocking my helmet against the ceiling of the cavity, but that's generally about the size of it.
Okay. And we're about 45 minutes into this 60-minute long chat, and I still have a sheet literally full of questions. And so I apologize to everyone who's done a great job of asking questions so far. We are not going to be able to answer everyone's questions, but the good news is we are hoping to have more of these throughout the season. The Condor season, if the chick survives, will be a nice long one, and we have great people to talk to. So I just wanted to thank everybody for their questions and give you the realization we won't be able to answer all of them, although we may try and follow up. If you've tweeted us these questions, we might be able to follow up and answer those on Twitter, again, using that hashtag AskCondors. So a couple of questions here about the whole interaction between captive birds, the breeding process there, and the wild birds. So if you could talk maybe, Estelle, a little bit about sort of the success of chick rearing in captivity versus the wild, give some scale to the number of chicks that are produced in captivity each year. And yeah, maybe just start with that. I'll have more for you.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so, and Joseph, jump in on the numbers if you want on here. So, yeah, I guess it depends. I want to say Boise produces maybe, what, 30 chicks?
Yeah, I think in total there's about 40 to 50 chicks produced each year by the captive breeding program.
Okay. So, as far as the interplay between the wild and captivity, one thing to keep in mind, that we do active nest management in Southern California because, we have that very specific challenge of microtrash ingestion. Not all of the sites are managing their nests so intensively, and particularly at those sites, it is a wild population, and so parents are having more of a natural nest success number. So, if you get in the high 40% of eggs producing wild-fledged chicks, that's a pretty natural number, up through 50%, and that's pretty good. Now, in captivity, there's a couple of different things. You don't necessarily, well, you don't have predation. You don't have the pressures of disease. And then even natural kind of anomalies, occurrences like malpositioning of an embryo in an egg, things that would result in failure in the wild, the amazing captive breeding teams are able to actually, for instance, assist hatch chicks out of eggs. And so I want to say, in the very high 90% of nest success in captivity. And, each condor is still very precious genetically and, of course, in terms of resources. So in captivity, the goal is to really fledge every chick if possible.
That's great. I had no idea there were so many being produced each year. We also, there's a lot of questions about their behavior. We've seen some really interesting behaviors in the nest where it looked like the female was maybe feeding the male adult bird at one point. There's been times where it looks like they were maybe having a little bit of an exaggerated discussion of who gets to brood the chick. And I don't know if you could speak at all to those behaviors, Estelle, and give us a sense of what's going on there. Is that an accurate way to think of it?
Sure. Well, it's really funny. Folks are noticing, maybe a little bit of, mild conflict among the pair members when they do their what we call switch outs. So, you guys may have observed it looks like the male and female share parental care about equally. And so, yeah, as far back as Finley and Koford, they were noticing that, agonistic interactions, levels. So you might get posturing. If you see two dogs meet in the street and, one maybe looks up a little taller and the other kind of shies back a little, we do see that sort of body language in condors as well. And, way back in those eras, they were identifying it as possibly indicators of social dominance, which through some studies we now know, and even observations, you can see that condors have a dominance hierarchy. The other funny thing is they used kind of human terms to characterize it. Finley went so far as to say one of the condors looked annoyed. So long story short, yes, I think that's an accurate characterization of what people are seeing. We have more data to analyze as to whether there really is a difference between pairs in how much that behavior is expressed. But I would say anecdotally, some pairs seem a little more squabbling than others. And then sometimes it depends if you have a really young pair, not necessarily an age, but newly formed pair. They take a little while to kind of synchronize their switch outs. When you get a really smooth pair, you'll see one condor leave the nest before you see the other condor come in. That's quite common. And, they're synchronizing their switch outs very nicely. So, yes, I definitely think that's what people are seeing. And there are individual variations probably.
Well, we may be seeing that right now because 111 just got up and hopped out of the nest. So I guess we'll see if they're getting, nice, well-orchestrated switch out. At this point, how long might they leave the chick alone, sitting there? It seems, to us sitting on this side of the camera, it might look very vulnerable. but it's obviously something that happens a lot. So can you speak at all to that?
Well, I mean, this early on, they don't leave the chick very long. You'd start to get concerned if you saw, an egg or a very young chick, more than, an hour, 2 hours, for an egg, 3 hours, maybe a little more. At this age, the chicks actually aren't capable of thermoregulating themselves. So basically the parents are brooding them, keeping them warm almost constantly. And you really see that drop off at about 30 days of age when they're capable of thermoregulating. And so the time the parents spend at the nest drops off dramatically too. And so then it becomes more of a, drop some food off, preen the chicks, spend a little bit of time hanging out. But the other thing to keep in mind is, we have this view of inside the cavity, but the parents also hang out often just outside of the cavity, and even in trees, snags, a little bit farther outside of the cavity. And we consider that a form of parental care too. They're in the area. If another, a golden eagle were to come by, the parent is there and can respond. So we have a slice of what's going on.
Well, that actually segues into a question that has been a popular one that relates to something that happened on this nest. As many of our viewers know, the initial egg laid by number 111 was predated. It disappeared from the nest overnight when the cam was off a few weeks back, and there was a great big effort to get a fake egg into the nest to keep her. Sorry, like everyone here, I get distracted when a bird walks back into view. You guys will see it on the live view here pretty soon. So could either of you speak to what was likely to have been that predator, and more broadly, are there still threats we should be thinking about to either the chick, eggs more generally across the range, and the adults? Are there predators of condors?
Yeah. So at the nest, this particular nest, obviously the egg went missing overnight. So we can't say, we're kind of speculating what may have happened. I think that the most plausible explanation is some sort of probably terrestrial nocturnal predator, maybe a raccoon, or potentially even a ringtail. We have actually seen ringtails around the nest at other nest cavities, although they didn't seem to approach and the parents didn't seem to be bothered by them. So it's still speculation, but we think our best bet is maybe a predator of that size. Probably got away with the nest. How it got to the egg with the parent sitting on it at night is a bit of a guess. Parents are awfully protective. I certainly know firsthand going in to nests. Many parents are will stand their ground for as long as they can before you can get at them. But others, and it really has to do with the personality of the bird, will kind of be more easily displaced. And so it's tough to say. It looks like it was the male that was on the nest the night it went missing. It's interesting to see what, after the fact, like, when the camera came back on, the pair was still trying to go in and sit. There was actually some egg shells still remaining there. And, we'll maybe post some clips on that on the Condor Cave or the Cornell site, but, sit down and sit and incubate. And so that was a really good sign that we were able to, act fast and go in and put a dummy egg in there in order to basically foster them a captive laid egg.
Yeah, it's a really amazing thing that we, we were probably a week away from going live when that happened, and everybody was like, what? And this is sort of par for the course in doing cams on sort of endangered species in difficult places to work. And that could be a whole nother live chat, just talking about those challenges. So we only have a few minutes left.
Oh, go for it, Charles.
And so I just wanted to give you guys a chance to just share, this is the end of the first conversation we're having with this audience. We thank really everybody that showed up planning for this, and those of you that have stuck around that didn't even know it was happening. Thanks for listening in. But given that we haven't even been able to get to all of these questions, are there great places you would recommend people checking out, whether they're Fish and Wildlife resources, Santa Barbara Zoo resources? And I'll just mention A lot of these are going to be in our FAQ, which is on the All About Birds webpage. So you can find those, probably a lot of these, but if you guys want to have just a couple seconds, Estelle, if you'd like to go first.
Sure. I mean, I think a great place, sorry, I might be scooping you, Joseph, but if you go to the Hopper Mountain National Wildlife Refuge complex page, there's a great collection of information and links about the recovery program and many of the partners. And so you can kind of link from there and, click and go to the LA Zoo and find out about their role, the Peregrine Fund, San Diego Zoo and Wild Animal Park, the National Park Service. So that would be a really great starting point. And then, there's just such a great trove of historical literature too. If you read, Koford's monologue from his days, I mean, they couldn't tag birds the way we could. And so you're reading these excruciatingly detailed diaries without the benefit of cameras and technology, but it paints such a vivid picture. It's just amazing to compare that picture in your mind to the picture on the screen. So yeah, those are a couple of resources I would check out for sure.
That's great. I don't know if you have anything you'd like to add to that, Joseph.
Yeah, obviously, Estelle mentioned us. I'm going to mention them. But the Santa Barbara Zoo has their conservation and research kind of branch of their website. Of their website is awesome. And then we work together. We have a partnership where we manage a Facebook page called the Condor Cave, and the Condor Cave is really where we're kind of posting a lot of the most up-to-date, up-to-date happenings in terms of what's happening in Southern California. Our partners, say up in Big Sur, the Ventana Wildlife Society, Pinnacles National Park, the Peregrine Fund, all somewhat do the same thing. So you can kind of see what's happening at all the variety of release sites. But we post a lot of fun stuff on the Condor Cave. We have fun with it. It's a mix of some humor and some science. So hopefully people get it that way. It's certainly a place to go if you have questions. I know we didn't get to many of them. Estelle and I are both talkers, but we are happy to answer lots and any question that folks have. There's also there's curriculum that the zoo and the Fish and Wildlife Service have put together called the Condor Kids. And so people can go to condorkids.net to download that. So we're trying to, disseminate information in many different ways. The huntingwithnonlead.org in terms of, that angle for the non-lead outreach. But we're definitely doing our best to get the word out there. The Fish and Wildlife Service also has a California Condor web page that's kind of just dedicated to that. It's the program, and so that's managed through our regional office in Sacramento, and that's also for reports and kind of numbers. That's a great place to go as well.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank both of you for taking some time out of your schedules. I know that this is a really busy time of year for both of you, as it is for us. Spring is a great time, but it's a heck of a work day. So to be able to chisel an hour out of your day to share with all of our viewers, I think they really appreciated it. I think from the number of questions we have, we definitely need to do another one of these. And if by the grace of ringtails and golden eagles and everything, we get a nice, beautiful, wonderful, giant chick ready to fledge in a few months, I think that'll really be the greatest reward for all of us. But on behalf of us here at the Cornell Lab, I want to thank you guys for sharing your time and your expertise, and for being so welcoming to all the new viewers. That this is often, their first sighting of a condor came via your cam, and we really appreciate that. So have a great day to everybody out there. We're going to sign off now, but thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, and feel free to send us feedback either to the Twitter feed. You can leave it on any of our Facebook pages, or you can email us at birdcams@cornell.edu. We'd love to hear what you think about it, and because we'd like to do more of this kind of thing, and knowing that you guys like it definitely helps. So thanks again, Joseph, Estelle. We'll see you again soon.
Thanks, Charles.
Thank you, guys. Thank
Yes,
you.
ma'am.